Hello, Georgetta Gancars here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you some simple ways that you can use the brush or the palette knife. Let's start with the palette knife. This is called the half blade, and you can see half of its head, it looks like, is kind of missing. The first thing that you can do with using the half blade is kind of dipping your paint on the edge of the palette knife and making these marks. So sometimes students want a line, like a continuous line. They can make a line like that. They can also make a line with the palette knife and pull it out. So in other words, I just made a line and I can evenly pull out that line from the side. So that's the first thing that you can do. You could have another color under there, like a yellow. And as you see, when I pulled it out, I have this blue. But the blue, because I really pulled it out with the knife, some of the areas are darker and some of the areas are lighter. This way you can have layering on top of each other. So I'll show you what I mean. I clean my knife. I'm just going to put a little bit, let's say, of red underneath. So again, line, putting a line here, and then pulling it out. You have this nice pink. After I do that, I'm going to clean my knife again. I'm going to pick up another color like this blue, only on the edge, and I'm going to layer it on top, and I'm going to pull it out. And the wonderful thing is when you do this, if you don't drag the knife all the way, you have to practice how you're going to push on the knife. You'll get an idea where you have some of the color showing underneath and then some of it not. So now we have these combos of these pinks and blues, but I can also pull it all the way across. And this is nice when you want to do layering and you still want to keep the idea of something being transparent. Do you see how you get all that beautiful layering underneath of there? And you can put another color. So you can have 3 or 4 colors on top of each other. Sometimes I do that with a smaller knife, my palette knife, if I want to get the texture of water right away, just with 2 or 3 strokes, and I want to add like green and then yellows and reds or reflections into my water. And you can use a smaller knife, and it will work the same. You'll just be using the half of this side. So that's something with the palette knife. The other thing we can do with the palette knife, if we can load it up, and then we can do what I call stairs. So it's down, stop, down, stop, down, stop, down, stop, down, stop, down, stop. And I did it very thin with less paint, but if you do it with a lot of paint, you can see you kind of get this kind of texture going on. I do that when I'm making buildings, like say for an example, the roof on the top of the building. A lot of Italian buildings have those like little squares. This works perfectly. And of course you can do the same thing and you can layer another color on top of that, like we did up here, and make it thicker. The next thing that you can do with your palette knife is you can load up 2 different colors on each side. So on this side, you see I have a little bit of red, and I kind of smooth it out. And then on the other side, I'm going to have maybe some ochre here, like this. And what I can do is I can go with my palette knife and I can go down and I can turn it around. I can go down and then I can turn it around, and I'll do it longer like this. And I'm combining the colors, okay? And I still get those steps. I'll do it in another color so you can see it a little bit better with the red and maybe the blue. So I'm going to pick up some blue, and now I have red on the other side. I'm just doing the same thing, and I'm dragging it, and then I'm picking it up and dragging it, and then I'm dragging it, and I'm picking it up and dragging it. And you can see the blue going into the red and the red going into the blue. So sometimes students like that, and I'll show you up close. That works really well. You kind of get this kind of texture going on here. The other thing that I can do with the knife is I can put down a color and then I can use the side of my blade to scrape into it. So say for an example, I have this color down here, I can just use and I can kind of make these kind of scrapes into the knife when I want to get the texture. Kind of looks like that. Okay. The other thing that I can also do with my knife is just build up colors real fast. Like say for an example, I wanted to do a mountain. We'll do it in red and blue. I could just put down these colors, and I did a whole mountain real fast before with you with the proper color browns, but I could just build up these areas where I'm making this kind of shape of a mountain using those negative spaces and then coming back with another color, okay? So you could do that in brown, say, and then a light brown. You could add a highlight, maybe if you wanted to put a tea white in there and mix them together directly on. So these are things that you can just do with a knife besides regular blending. I teach a whole class on that. It's separate where we do tons of more things with the knife, but those are just some simple things besides mixing. The other thing that you can do with the knife is putting on a color. So let's put on this blue color, and then I'm going to take my knife and I scrape it off. And what I do is I add a little bit of red on my knife too, so I can go back with the red and I can kind of scrape it off. And I do this when I'm doing abstract paintings and I really want to build them up, and I want all of these colors down here at once, or I want to do a background sometimes, and I kind of get this instant kind of texture that happens, and I get a wonderful sense of transparency. Believe it or not, you can also do it with watercolors, right? You can get that same kind of textural feeling, and it kind of looks something like that. Okay? So, now let's move on to the brushes. Okay, so don't forget to clean your palette knife too when you're doing that. Now, the other thing I want to say, when I have students clean their brushes, I tell them to swirl it in the water, but don't have the water where the brush is, pushing the brush down, because you have too much water here, and what ends up happening, this swells the ferrule, and that destroys the brush, and it comes off. Also, never take your brushes and swirl them really deep, you see, where you're damaging the bristles. What I usually do is if I have paint on my brush, I take a rag, I wipe it off first, and try to get off all the color, and then swirl it in my solvent, and keep doing that until I clean my brush, and then I'll reshape my brush, and then I can put it in warm, soap. You can use the brush cleaner, or you can just use a warm detergent, a little bit of lukewarm water, not hot, and just swirl the brush, and then reshape it and let it dry. Don't put it in a brush holder right away because it'll get moldy. Let your brushes dry, and when they dry, leave them upright or flat, never like this in a cup. Okay, so we already talked before I did a video about the different type of brushes. Just to remind you, the better brush when you're using oils and acrylics is a longer brush. Watercolor brushes would be a little bit shorter because you're not having that much space, and you don't need a long arm, which means that if I was using this brush, I have a really long arm, I can kind of extend it and get a stroke that's a larger, wider stroke. But if I'm using watercolors, I'm a little bit closer to the paper. It's a little bit more, exact. So a longer brush works really well. You obviously need a wash brush. There's different types of wash brushes. There's a mop brush for watercolors, and there's also a hack that you can use for oils and acrylics and also varnishing. It's a shorter brush, and sometimes the brushes are thick here, but they work really well for washes because you can kind of go across, and the brush is a little bit wider. Remember, if you're using brushes that are synthetic, so I'll show you one that's kind of like synthetic. It's very soft. Sometimes the hair could look white or look sable. You have to really, if you get the solvent off of the brush. So if you have too much water, or if you have too much linseed oil or terpenoid, you want to kind of get that off of the brush, because those synthetic brushes they really don't absorb it. And then when you put it on your canvas, you don't want too much of that solvent on there or bubbles. You know, if you're using turp and you have too much turp, when you're putting the oil paint, it's not going to stick that well to the canvas. So again, make sure that you're kind of dabbing that brush. The synthetic hair brushes work excellent for washes because they hold the weight of the paint and your solvent, which could be like your water or your turp, your Zest-It, your linseed, your Gamasol, whatever you're using. So the first thing is I'm dipping my brush in this sense in my solvent, which is water, since these are acrylics, and I'm going to do a wash. I tell students when they do the wash, they need to just kind of dab the brush. Never take the whole brush and put the brush directly into the paint. You have too much paint on the end of the brush, so it only should be this much always when you have a wash. Do not saturate the whole brush. And what you're going to do is you're going to start on one end and you're just going to move the brush across the canvas, just very softly. Don't push out. What happens is when students do a wash, they usually have too much water in their brush. So I'm going to do it the wrong way, so you see now how not to do it. And they have too much water in their brush, and then they kind of put it on the paper, and then it just runs like that. So just remember, dip your brush off and just kind of wipe it. If you have a wash and it keeps running, the other option that you could do is you could take a clean, dry rag or a rag that, you know, could be old, but it has, you know, no wet paint on it, and just kind of wipe it out and then just start again. Sometimes I do that on a canvas and I still get that beautiful light blue wash. Doesn't have to be that dark, okay? So dip it, make sure you have the end of your water, and then you're solving, and then you're just wiping the brush across. If you don't want it, you know, you can pull it out and make it very smooth. This works nice when I'm doing watercolors and I want instant clouds. I don't need to use wax resist with the watercolors, or I don't need to use any kind of masking fluid. I can just put down the color and then pull out the color with a rag or a dry brush. Okay, so one more time, dip and wipe off, and then we have this beautiful wash. Now, if I want to do an impressionist wash, I will let those strokes stay in the brush. So I'll show you at the top one. You see these brush strokes? You can see how rough they are, right? They're not smooth like the one below it. And the way I do that is when I dip my brush in the water, I wipe it off on the rag and pick up the paint on the end. I dab it like this, but I make sure that there's not a lot of water in there, and I get this kind of rough kind of texture going on, okay? And I do that sometimes when I want to build up water. You see how I can get these strokes, and if you look at them really close here, you can do that where you're just building up, and then I could go with another color blue on top of here and do that, and I can just build up that water and make it instantaneously, make it look like water in an ocean if I'm doing an impressionist painting. Okay, so now I'm going to just get another piece of paper, so hold on. I'm going to turn this all over. And now I'm going to move to the different types of brushes. So a lot of times students want to do a stroke and they were still on the wash brush and they want to build up a lot of texture instantaneously. So what I do is I dip my brush in my color only on the edge and I kind of dot it and I have this kind of texture. Sometimes I do this when I want to do trees, and I'll have like green, I'll have a light green and a dark green, and I'll make this texture all at the same time. I also can pull out that color. So I can take my brush and then I can kind of pull out this color, and this is what it looks like. So you have these beautiful strokes underneath, And then you have this. It also works really well when you're doing, watercolors and you want to pull out the color underneath. And you can keep pulling out that color. I'll show you. I'm just using the same brush, right? Okay, so let's cover this up. I'm going to do something else. Okay. The other thing is I can put a beautiful like tea white on top of that and change the whole look. So I'll show you. Let me take some tea white out now. And we can also use modeling paste, which is really thick. And we can kind of put it on tap. Sometimes I do this where I just kind of rub it into the paint and do that. And make a certain kind of texture, or I could just use a lighter color on top, okay? The other thing I want to show you with the wash brush is picking up two different colors. So now I picked up my red and my blue, and I'm going like this, and I have this kind of texture again with this combination here of my red and my blues. So wash brush going across, doing small strokes, blending it, then going across and reblending it from right to left or left to right, depending on which hand you're going to use. The next thing I want to show you is the next kind of brush. So that would be your hack brush or your mop brush. And you can do the same kind of texture with this round brush. So let's change our colors and let's do like maybe a green. Let's have some nice green here. And let's mix the green maybe with some ochre. And I'm dabbing this in both colors at the same time. So I have two colors on the end of my brush. And then I'm just dabbing it and putting it down. This is how, again, I do these trees. If I press hard, the colors will blend. You see? If I press harder, now on top of this, the colors will blend. If I don't, the colors will have those white negative spaces. So when you want to make a color look soft, you can kind of press down on it with the round brush and blend those colors. Or you could add a white, like an opaque. Do you see if I keep blending it, how it's going to change? And I can get that instantaneously if I was doing trees or something like that. So again, round brush is really good for that. I'll show you what it looks like on the end here. The other thing, we have these brushes, these fan brushes. So they kind of look like this. It's like a fan. And then we can use it doing the same kind of thing. I did this before in another video where I'm just picking up the color on the edge. And let's just say I'm putting down these greens, and I get these strokes right away. I don't have to do them with a small, thin brush. It works for everything, watercolors, acrylics, oils, and I can go back in here and I can go with a lighter color, a darker color, and I'll show you what it looks like up close. Those are your strokes, okay? And then I can blend another color with that. I can add let's just add I have it right here, a ochre. I didn't even clean the brush. And I'm just gonna add those colors in between where that negative space is. And I don't take a lot of time building up my painting. I can go with another color that's in between here and maybe put a yellow. So now I've got these kind of strokes going on. Okay, and I can keep building that up. If I want to blend it and make it softer, I would use the brush, not going up and down like this. Now I can use it like this. So again, when I was doing these strokes, I was going like this, but now I'm going to blend it up. So I'm just blending them together, and I get this softer kind of feel. I can dip it in my solvent if I want water to blend it even more, but I get this textural feeling where it's more soft and it builds up like that. And I can keep doing that to the harder that I push with the brush, the more it will blend. I can go back to the side and pick up more color and and keep building on top. And that's good for my layering of my Impressionist paintings when I'm painting outside plein air. This fan brush also comes in a little small size too. So I use many different sizes like this. So that's the mama brush, the little brush. Okay, the other thing that I can do is I'll show you this. I can use this kind of brush, which has like this square edge. It's another flat, a smaller flat. Some flats are, I'll show you, this is a flat, but it's a little bit longer and it's thicker here, and this is thinner. I'm going to use the thinner one because I can do that same thing where I'm picking up the ochre on this side and the other color on this side, the green, and I can just, in one stroke, I can kind of go back, front, back, front. So I'm just trying to changing the stroke and changing the brush. As you can see, I'm turning it, going one side then the other, because one side has green on it and one side has ochre. And this is the way I build up these colors and make them look very thick and blend together at the same time. And I have this soft blending. And I'll show you what it looks up close in a minute. And I'm just doing this. So practice again. Different sides with the palette knife, building up the colors and switching your brush, going from one side to the other. If you use a flat brush, you can really see those shapes of those strokes coming out. You can see the flat shape of the stroke. The other thing that you can do with the brush that's flatter, that's larger, is let's just pick up some red here. Make it a purple, new color. And I have it here, and I can do what I call a dry brush technique, where I'm just putting the paint down and dragging it. So when I usually do a dry brush technique, that means that I'm just picking up the paint. I don't have a lot of the paint with the solvent, and I get this kind of, these textures. You see how there's all that negative space in that stroke, right? It's not a continuous stroke. And if you're doing that on a canvas that already has like a color on top of it, you can just drag. You see another color on top of it, or just another color, where you can see some of that color that comes through. It doesn't cover it all as far as layering it. But that works really good for texture. But for that dry brush, you don't need any solvent like water or turp or linseed oil or Gamasol or Zested or nothing. It's just your dry brush, right? You can also do it if your brush is a little bit wet. Of course, it would be a little bit different. You pick up two different colors here, and then you would drag it. And what ends up happening is the colors blend. And I'll show you the difference of that stroke. Okay, that stroke now looks like that, right? Whereas when you see when we were using the flat brush, how different it is. You can kind of see the shapes here, but in here, this is all blended, right? And that works well with oils, acrylics,